Good morning, afternoon, or evening, depending on where you're joining us from. Today, I'm really excited to speak to Sandy Climan. Sandy is a president of Entertainment Media Ventures. He was part of a senior management team at Creative Artists Agency for 12 years, where he was the founder and head of CA's corporate practice and a senior talent agent representing such stars as Robert De Niro, Robert Redford, Kevin Costner, Danny DeVito, and many prominent film and television production companies. You've been an active investor, advisor to venture capital firms, early stage companies in media, technology, healthcare. A really long, illustrious bio, which I could keep reading and reading, but it's a real pleasure to speak to you today.
I'm just thrilled to be here, Alex. I could not be more excited about working with Security Scorecard and the sense of, where we are today. I mean, we used to live in a much more secure environment in many ways. And, the issues in our lives and the risks we took were pretty well known. In fact, when I was growing up, it was more like, don't go into this neighborhood, perhaps don't go out after this hour. I grew up in the Bronx. Today, the sense of where we need to protect ourselves, protect our businesses, protect our families, engage in the protection of our communities is 24/7, 365.
So, you described yourself as just a kid from the Bronx who benefited from some of the serendipity of life in your career. So, I'm curious, what are a few of the serendipitous moments that you think were crucial to becoming the industry titan that you are today?
Well, first thing is there is no industry titan. And, it's wonderful to look at on paper or virtual paper, the things that I've been involved with, none of them happen without great creators, without a team. The Aviator's a good example. I was there to help. And when you're working in the service of either great creators or great entrepreneurs, you have to think of yourself as in service and always understand that your world is on the shoulders of the greatness, of the creativity, and the skills of others. So look, I mean, I grew up in the Bronx. Neither parent went to college. Both first generation Americans, immigrant parents. My dad worked for the Board of Education and the Finance Department of the City of New York because they had a civil service system so that even as a veteran, you could enter that system without a degree and actually move to senior positions that today probably need an MBA. But neither parent went to college. So I'm growing up, it's the public school system, and I want to put in my endorsement for the public schools and what they do for the education and socialization and lifting up everyone and a backbone of why America and places with strong educational systems are necessary. So PS 78, IS 144 in the Bronx. I get a letter at age 14. I got into Bronx science. Now, had I gone to where my brother went to high school, where with no exaggeration, they killed people every quarter, probably more so now, it was 10,000 students in one building, started at 6 a.m., ended at 6 p.m. I get into Bronx science, which is a specialized high school. And I get a letter saying I had been selected for a special class to do a directed research project. I misread the letter, which is common in my life. And what I thought it said was I had to do it right then. It actually was junior year. And I didn't know what to do. My mom was a ward clerk at Jacoby Hospital, part of the Bronx Municipal Hospital System, where for the most part it was gunshot wounds and things like that. And it was affiliated with what is today a globally known medical school. It was globally known before, but with the Gottesman grant that basically covers free tuition for all medical students, I took the number 9 bus down Eastchester Road to the Albert Einstein College of Medicine. Now, when I'm growing up, there's no security. So you don't have to go through, anything other than walking in the front door of the medical sciences building, which is exactly what I did. I had no idea where I was going. I'd never been there before. Went up to the second floor because that was the first floor that I got to, walked down the hall and took a left into the office of a bearded, bespectacled, pipe smoking Professor William T. Norton. And I said to Professor Norton, do you mind if I stay and work in your lab? And for reasons that I have never fully understood, he said yes. And I spent 6 years in his lab between junior high school, and summers during college. It was the neurology department at Einstein. He was an early researcher in the structure of the myelin sheath and seminal work in the early stages of multiple sclerosis, which today is much more understood and controllable as a disease. And from there, graduating from Bronx Science gets you a ticket into any, I guess, any university. And bless my parents' heart, I did get into Harvard as well as many other schools. And, we didn't have the resources to visit any of these universities, but I knew I guess, again, on paper that Harvard was a great school. And I then, half my dad's salary and all of my mom's salary went to my education, and I was the worst chemistry major in Harvard history. I actually had a Nobel laureate as an advisor, Professor Conrad Block, and he actually thought I was a horror an advisee. And I spent most of my time on the Lampoon and studied art history. And then, you know, after 3 years, had enough credits to graduate. And my girlfriend at the time said, thinking of applying to the School of Public Health, which I thought, hey, I'd never thought of that. And in a serendipitous moment, I applied to the Health Policy and Management program, the Master of Science in Health Policy and Management at the Harvard School of Public Health, and miraculously got in. That was a hedge against not getting into business school, got into business school, and then combined the program. And that was 3 degrees in 6 years. Now, to be fair, I spend about 20 to 30% of my time in health and wellness giving back. If Professor Norton had not said yes to my being in his lab, I likely wouldn't be in this conversation with you. And all that follows, it comes from that kind of generosity and interest that someone takes in you. The first book he gave me was Role Models in Science,
Hmm.
and it shapes your view of the world. And again, had it not been for all of these steps in my career, nothing that I can do today and try to do today to pay it back would be possible. And it is really important to know who has given you opportunity, to understand the opportunity that you need to give others.
That's a fantastic story. So it sounds like Professor Norton was really formative in who you became. Were there any other key mentors that you had, and what did you learn from them?
Well, you graduate business school, and, I wanted to work in the creative side of the entertainment industry. And in those days, it is just movies and television. And I figured I would work in television because it was a better business, but I didn't know. And I'd never been west of West Virginia. I'd gone to the National Youth Science Camp that got me to West Virginia. Until my second year in business school, I had never been to the West Coast to California. So I ended up coming to California, and we first came on a research tour for Harvard, which was a boondoggle to sort of get you to meet people that could hire you. And I met a man named Jason Rabinowitz. Jay at the time was the chief financial officer of MGM. And for whatever reason, I remember we talked, and he gave me 30 names of people to meet. And I met 30 of the most impressive people I'd ever met, who were the good people, not the kind of irrational people I'd heard lived in Hollywood. These were all kind, serious, focused creators and businessmen, people who ran networks, people who ran companies. And I couldn't get a job. I actually was one of 3 graduates that year at HBS that didn't have a job. And I had come out with 3 friends who I had done a project. It was the first student film. They had done the first student film for HBS, and we were doing a project with a producer named Josephine Levine. So we came west, and I basically got them information. I'd gotten them a relationship with the Lampoon to do it. And they basically then said, we're going our way, and you're not going with us. And I came west and actually started as a second secretary. So all of those degrees, and I'm not a secretary, I'm a secretary to a secretary at a small independent production company. One day, Jay Rabinowitz calls up and says, what are you doing? I said, I got a job. I said, I'm so excited to tell you I've got a job. He said, how much are they paying you? And I said, well, it's not what they're paying me. It's what I'm learning. He said, how much are they paying you? And I said, well, I'm learning so much. He says, how much are they paying you? I said, $13,000 a year. He says, how are you going to eat? And I'm like selling records. I'm doing anything. I'm cashing in bar mitzvah bonds. I mean, it's whatever, because I have dollar certificates from friends who are at UCLA and from the Bruin, and you could go to Kentucky Fried Chicken and sort of, clog your arteries, but have dinner for $1. And he said, come to MGM. And again, mentor, friend. And at the end of the day, I went to MGM, and the trick in life is to be of service, to listen well, and to work hard, and to give back. And what I didn't realize in those days was that some companies were stable managements, and then there was MGM, which was a completely unstable management. They kept changing CEOs and heads of production. So I ended up being on the wrong side of one of those. And then, because I had been instrumental in setting up one of the major television producers on the MGM lot, he actually controlled half of the production in TV. In the film business, when I got fired by MGM, he hired me the next week. And that, again, just you always remember the people who are there. And the other that I remember, which is a story I've never told, is you're fired by MGM and you think your career might be over. And what happens? One, the publicity department, the marketing department decides to run an article on the third page of the Hollywood Reporter that was basically my resume. that I was leaving, and they printed my resume. The headline was Climan ousted at MGM by Fields. And Freddie Fields was the head of production who had taken over from the two production heads I'd lived through. And then David Gerber read that and hired me into his company a week later. But I also got a call from a woman I had met serendipitously at a premiere. And her name was Lorraine Scheinberg. And that was Sid Sheinberg's wife, who was the president of MCA Universal.
Hmm.
And she said, we hear what happened. She said, we've put a cover on the Universal Amphitheater. Frank Sinatra is performing. Would you like to come as our guest to the opening of the Universal Amphitheater? And I thought to myself, maybe I'm not out of the business. And that was just, these are the sort of lovely touches, and we should always be there at the darker moments in people's careers to lift them up, because they will move forward and contribute in new ways. So there was that. And then, I had tried to get hired by CAA for 6 years. Creative Artists Agency was a new agency, but it was rapidly becoming and had become the most powerful agency in the business, and growing at an exponential speed in terms of signing pretty much every major talent in Hollywood. And I didn't get hired for 6.5 years. And then finally, having, helped some of the young agents there, they had gone to a man named Michael Ovitz, who was one of the founders of the agency and the CEO, the president of the agency, and ran it. And he finally called me in for a meeting. And I gave him an article about investment bankers in the entertainment space from a magazine he'd never heard of. And basically, I wouldn't be on this call if he had not hired me. And he said, I don't know what you're going to do, but maybe you can keep pace. And out of that, the genius of CAA in those days, which is a small company compared to the large global company it is today, was that Mike Ovitz, Ron Meyer, Bill Haber, the three principals, never worried about losing a client. So they would expose you to anybody that you could work with. So one day Mike said, and this, I'm at the agency less than 6 months, you're going to walk in my office and you're going to have a piece of paper. I don't care what's on it. You're going to give me the piece of paper, but it's a pretext. Robert Redford's going to be in the office, and I'm going to introduce you to Redford. He's going to ignore you. And he said, I'm going to France with Ron, and he wants to do a low budget movie company. And he said, frankly, that's not the best financial thing for the agency. And I'm not really that concerned whether you get the deal done, but you're going to go do the deal. And off I went to Sundance to meet with Cineplex Odeon, the Canadian company, and Robert Redford, who at the time was, and in many ways will always be, one of the greatest talents. He was the most important talent in the world. He had just won an Academy Award for Ordinary People. Literally, if he walked down the street, buses would stop. And he was is an extraordinarily gifted man. And, even though he was uncomfortable that I was there because he didn't know me, and he called me down to his office on a Saturday afternoon, and he had swatted away agents for 10 years from CAA because he just didn't think they represented his interest. And I made a decision that I have always told anyone I've worked with and my children is the decision that was life changing for me. I mean, he looked at me and he said Legal Eagles, which is a movie that, you know, he really didn't want to be in. And he felt he got put in by the agency because the agency had all of its clients in that movie. It was Daryl Hannah, it was Deborah Winger, it was directed by Ivan Reitman. And it was a very light, fluffy comedy. And it felt wrong to him. And he said, literally looked at me and said, Legal Eagles, expecting me to take the company's line. And I did what I made a decision that was not a hard decision, but I'm not sure how I came to it. I decided to do what I've always done and what I've told everyone they need to do, which is to tell him the truth in a way he could hear it. And I said, look, I said, there's a scene after you are, cooking breakfast after you're with Daryl Hannah for the night, an unseemly thought right there. And I said, you rarely, people rarely get to see you do comedy. And it was a wonderful comedic scene. And I said, on balance, I wouldn't do the film again, which is the first time I think an agent had taken issue with something the agency had packaged. And I also knew if he told my boss that I said that, I probably would have been fired on the spot and had to get back from Sundance under my own speed. And we worked together for 12 years. And it was a remarkable relationship where I learned an enormous amount from him about creativity, decisions, and also how to lead an artistic life and be a concerned and engaged citizen, as well as how to treat others, because we are all on teams and movies are the quintessence of a team.
Hmm.
And that again, all of these things shape who you are.
So it's super interesting. What were some maybe other favorite lessons that you learned from some of your clients? It sounds like that was a really good lesson that you learned from Robert Redford. Were there any other favorite lessons that you learned from some of the people you worked with and represented?
Let me put in a plug for James Andrew Miller's book Powerhouse, which is the story of the first 40 years of CAA. And it actually has, not just from me, but many anecdotes that are highly instructive and quite accurate about how to deal with complex situations and create community around work. But I'll give you an example. So, Robert De Niro is a uniquely gifted actor, probably one of the greatest actors who's ever lived. Anything he touches, he elevates. He also doesn't really talk that much. And, he has a reputation for, he's very direct, but he was also at that time doing many films that were artistically meritorious, but not commercial. Jackknife, about a Vietnam vet, Stanley and Iris, where he and Jane Fonda played an illiterate baker. There were these small movies, and they weren't working financially. They worked artistically because of who was in them and how they were written and directed, but they were financially not successful. I mean, This Boy's Life probably being the most successful of those. All I remember about the script is it's dark, it's ugly, there's death, there's blood, there's snow, there's all kinds of stuff going on. And instead of doing what most agents would do, which is basically say to him, don't do it because it's commercially a disaster, for reasons I'm not sure, I said to him, what do you see in it? And he said, there's something in the part that I've never experienced, and I want to have that experience. And that's a pure artist. He didn't look at the commerciality of the piece. He looked at his own personal growth as an actor by doing what great actors really do, immersing themselves in someone else's life in a world that they have to be someone else. And in doing so, it's not just that they give a great performance, but they change themselves and expand who they are by having had that experience. I think for executives, they should look at their role as an executive, whether it's in the C suite or elsewhere, as the same type of immersive experience. If you look at it not as a managerial experience, but as a life experience, I think it makes you a better manager and I think it makes you a better person.
That's super interesting about looking at it as an immersive experience. Well, let's talk about bridging Hollywood, Silicon Valley, and cybersecurity. So, Hollywood and popular culture icons of today are a little different than they were in the past. How have you seen this landscape evolve?
Well, the funny part, and we talk about cybersecurity, I've been in and around and directly participating in many of the seminal films about cybersecurity. So when I was at MGM, we made war games and Matthew Broderick. And actually, when I ran 3Reality, Howard Postley, who was my CTO, actually, I am told, is the person on whom the Matthew Broderick character in War Games was patterned because the writers knew him growing up. And Howard is the quintessence again of somebody who thinks differently than anyone else. I mean, a visionary in terms of security, in terms of technology. So there's war games. I helped put together sneakers by accident one day, which Phil Alden Robinson did, and also we put Robert Redford in. And when I talk to hackers, they basically say that the film they all look at as the most authentic is Sneakers, which I think is great. And, I actually bought a t shirt recently. I was talking to a senior hacker in the UK, and he said, they still sell t shirts that say, SeaTac Astronomy, which in the movie was All the Secrets. So, Hollywood and Silicon Valley are very far apart. When I was in college, I was classmates with Gates and Ballmer. I did not know Bill Gates in college. I knew him later, but I have been friends with Steve Ballmer since freshman year, and he was the football manager. I was the treasurer of the Lampoon later on. And I grew up around technology and the people who later would be seminal in the growth of the business. So I was at CAA, and you have to be of a certain vintage to remember this, but there was something called CD-ROMs, and we all thought this was interactive entertainment. And it really wasn't. But Silicon Valley showed up in Hollywood for the very first time and largely was ignored. I remember they had a meeting at CAA. Nobody paid any attention, but I did. And we thought that this was going to be that first moment where entertainment became interactive. And what ended up happening was it was a packaged good. One of the wonderful experiences in my life, I'd met Bob Gunderson, who at the time was at Brobeck Flager. And he then introduced me to John Fiber, who was working with an invested company of theirs, a portfolio company, which was Knowledge Adventure, which Bill Gross of Idealab had founded. And they wanted to do a CD-ROM on being a director. And they were negotiating with Steven Spielberg. And so that was largely being done by Spielberg's business manager, Jerry Breslauer. And I became friends with Fiber, and I would tell him what was going to happen. Now, there are no cell phones in those days. And I would say, this is what they're going to ask for. And he would look at me and go, no one would ask for that. That's crazy. No one would ask for that. And I'd come home, the phone would ring, and it would be Johnny says, they asked for that. And I said, well, this is what's going to happen next. This is what's going to happen next. And eventually they made a deal, actually, because it was navigating behind the scenes, getting that first deal between Hollywood and Silicon Valley done. And actually, Silicon Valley in those days was Pasadena with Bill. So after CD-ROMs turned out not to be entertainment, but really early forms of edutainment and games, everybody left, but I stayed with Silicon Valley. And I started to work on boards. My first board was Pointcast, which is another entire discussion as to what went wrong there. And it's always good to have an extremely hot company that flames out on your early resume because you see things there that you can apply later. And I worked with Benchmark, USVP, others. They are all still good friends. I remember with Ovitz going to Paris and visiting with Steve Ballmer while he was running Microsoft Europe and had his offices at La Défense. And we talked about how far away our businesses were. And Steve put up a chart and he said, the convergence is here. it took another 10 to 20 years before the convergence actually is where we are today, which is that we are all one blended universe. We are in a nonlinear change where, and this is where security scorecards work is even more essential, is that the world is on a digital platform. We are moving from an industrial era to an information era where everything that we assumed in the past, things that we thought might be nice to happen, are happening. Things that we never thought could happen are consuming our lives.
So, Sandy, you helped co found and chair the hacking games, noting that the bad guys are recruiting kids at young ages before they know the difference between right and wrong. And we need young people to understand that hackers are a necessary force to protect their daily lives. We need to make the Justice League of America version of being a cyber superhero more attractive than joining the dark legions of Star Wars, good versus evil. So, can you talk a little bit about the Hacking Games initiative and what it is, and what are the parallels between creating a team of cybersecurity superheroes and traditional incident response teams?
Well, again, I think it speaks to a larger issue as well, which is when I was growing up, public education, Ivy League school, it sets you on a course because there are benchmarks that are grades, class ranking, degrees. And this is what set you in motion for the future because if you had the right series of those, anything is possible and it would assure your place in the world. What we need to do is to ensure that everyone can have an education. We are nowhere near that today. Today, when I was growing up, if you had resources, you bought the Encyclopedia Britannica. By the way, for those that are too young, an encyclopedia is a series of a lot of books that give you the knowledge of the world. And then it kind of gets updated every year. If you had less resources, you had the World Book. If you were my family, you went to the A&P grocery store and every month bought a different letter. Today, all of the knowledge of the world is available to anyone who can access the internet. You just have to know what's true and not true. And we are in a world of lifelong education. We are in a world of self-education. My children have, whatever they did in school, they did more by educating themselves. And that is essentially the difference between in security, people with degrees who are going to do wonderful work in the future, and they will build things, they will be programmers, they will be teams. And then there's the crazies. And the bad guys are often the crazies. So they're the ones who are figuring out how to get around the system rather than build the system. And what you need are people to protect you who think that way with white hat hacking. And, my friend Pablos Holman, who is, if you look him up on the internet, Pablos the Hacker, at age 14 in Alaska with evangelical parents, he was cracking large corporate security systems. His partner, Eric Johansson, who changed his name when I had to pay him once for a job, he said, my name is 3 Rick Johansson legally. He changed it to Hacker Code. And neither of these guys went to college, but they became exactly what the early days of hacking required. So they would get brought in after Accenture or Deloitte or somebody put in your security system, and they would hire these guys to crack it, and they would go crack the system. Finally, the consulting firms decided maybe we should hire these guys ourselves to make sure that we've stress test the systems we're putting in for millions, tens of millions, hundreds of millions of dollars to make sure we don't get embarrassed later because somebody without a college degree actually went in the back door. And we are now so far removed from those early amusing days of cybersecurity breaches. Right now, the creativity of a Robert Redford, Robert De Niro, Kevin Costner, Michael Mann is the creativity of a hacker. They are, as my friend Dmitry Alperovich said, who was a co-founder of CrowdStrike, the CTO, he said, I left Russia at 19. He said, I'm on with the Democratic Party, the hack of the Democratic Party. He said, I'm on this side of the Atlantic. He said, probably somebody I grew up with in Russia is on the other side. And I just have to outthink them. And Alex, as you and I have talked about, there are no fences. There's only a moving goalpost. And actually, we're living in a complex world of five-dimensional chess, trying to figure out what the next genius who wants to take $100 million from somebody, or will hold for ransom a large company, or will hold for ransom a city because they'll take down their electric grid. How we anticipate that, whether we can detect it early, how we thwart it. So 2 years ago, a group in Europe, which is some of them were cybersecurity experts, some of them were thinking about and were more in the communication space. All of them had kids. And as the CEO said, my son comes to me and says, I want to buy this with Robux on Roblox. And I'm being a good dad. I said, no, I'm not going to give you the money to do that. Somehow he gets it done. And the problem is that's where they get recruited, because the ones who are clever enough to get it done, they may be being helped by people who they shouldn't know, or they're doing things so well that the people they shouldn't know are looking at them saying, you're my kind of guy, let's start talking. So it's one thing to tell a kid not to get in a car with a stranger. It's another thing to tell a young person on a gaming platform who doesn't know that the person that they're interacting with could be a cyber criminal, that person who's disguised their identity and is now their friend probably has a different idea for them
Hmm.
than they should be following. So our goal is we know that there are at least 4 million jobs that require out of the box thinking. And companies will not hire people who don't have specific credentials, sometimes educational credentials. We're going to make sure that companies are acculturated to the fact that they need these people, and we are going to help identify, certify, and place the next generation of ethical hackers.
So, Sandy, at one point, you mentioned that while you've never been to Paris, you knew more about the city than some others who actually had been by virtue of consuming books, television, and film. Well, first of all, before I ask the next question, first of all, have you changed it? I hope you've visited Paris.
You know, the beauty of the entertainment business is that you have friends everywhere. Wherever you go, there is a community of people that welcome you. And as I've traveled with my children, the exercise is not to go as a tourist, it is to immerse yourself in the people and the culture. The rest of it comes anyway. But why, it is the sense everywhere I've gone, not only do you have friends, you make new friends, and then you stay with them, because all you should be doing, Alex, all I should be doing is bridging cultures. Is we will do our jobs better if we bring people together in understanding, in supporting each other. And that to me is the essence of travel.
So, building upon this, Hollywood has played a key role in shaping the public's perception of hacking and hackers. Given your entertainment background, how can you leverage Hollywood's influence to reframe the image of hackers from criminal masterminds to ethical defenders, the white hats?
Well, every film I've been involved with, and just take the two we mentioned, War Games, where he basically inadvertently starts World War III, but he is the one who undoes it. And Sneakers, where these, relatively criminal outcasts become the good guys. And the reality is that Hollywood is very influential, and it's no longer Hollywood. I mean, we are now on a global platform. We're getting our entertainment from Korea, from Turkey, from the Middle East, from the GCC, from Israel, from Latin America, and from Africa. And and we learn what we have to do with entertainment once again is, for those that can't travel, we're no longer exporting American culture, which for years is what Hollywood did. But all of the entertainment I watch are life lessons about how we behave towards each other, how we understand the world we live in, how we understand the human condition. I spoke at the Dubai International Film Festival about 25 years ago. And Abdul Hamid Juma invited me to come. I went under my own power. I paid for the whole thing myself because I really just wanted to support him. And I think he felt so guilty that I had flown there that he put me on a panel with the heads of either distribution or exhibition from Kuwait, the UAE, Gulf Cinemas, and Egypt. The only film all three of them spoke about was a film by Nadine Labaki, who is an extraordinary filmmaker and actress from Lebanon called Caramel. She has never left Lebanon. She's not been lured to Hollywood. Caramel is the story of four women in a Beirut beauty shop. It could be anywhere in the world, but it is in Lebanese and it is specific to the Lebanese culture and Beirut. I've given more copies of this film than any film because what it shows is that the aspirations of people all over the world is the same. And I can give you chapter and verse of films, whether they are from Hollywood or from around the world, where if we looked at them and studied them, we would learn everything from the human condition, about how people should treat each other, about politics, about history. And the trick is to make entertainment that engages, entertains, and is authentic. Now, with the hacking games, we're going to basically have a reality side of it and a scripted side of it because we don't look at that as the core profit making business. Of course, you want to make your entertainment profitable, but because we want people to see heroes in these young people, we want to create a sense of narrative and understanding about what the world's issues are in terms of security and cybersecurity. And because we want to bring people into an entertaining environment where they walk away from it because they will understand better the issues in their life by having seen them on these entertainment platforms. My friend Larry Brilliant, who is the world's leading epidemiologist fighting pandemics. At age 25 for the World Health Organization, he was a young hippie doctor in India, got recruited by the World Health Organization. He led the eradication of smallpox in the world and has from there run the Skull Global Threats Foundation, google.org. He and I met when we were on the board of the Centers for Disease Control, but Larry said he spent years trying to have people understand the issues of diseases and pandemics. He said when he was the technical advisor on Contagion, one movie educated everybody where years of articles and books and talks did nothing. This one movie with Dustin Hoffman made everybody understand exactly what the issues were.
Let's shift a bit into building trust in the age of cyber threats and misinformation. You're an investor, an advisor of Newsbreak, where the vision is to create a place where local news and community focused information is both abundant and accessible. Newsbreak is used by millions and millions of readers. It's worth pointing out, and we all know it, and you mentioned it in interviews, that media manipulation is nothing new. In the past, we've seen all kinds of media manipulation in the past with British Ministry of Information's video of the Lambeth Walk. You had the Commissar Vanishes, where you had the falsification of photographs and art in Stalin's Russia, where they created fraudulent photographs through silent alteration and other type of techniques. So now, much easier. You just type a prompt into ChatGPT and you can generate a fairly convincing video, a deepfake. For example, just like you and I are speaking to each other live, I could type a prompt and all of a sudden Sandy Climan is in Antarctica instead of in Los Angeles having a conversation with Aleksandr Yampolskiy. It's really hard to know what to trust, what not to trust in this age of information and misinformation. So, could you talk a little bit about the evolution of media as you've seen it and the idea of trust? Which creators of content can build it and what does it require?
Well, the issue of trust is a complex issue because I think where we are falling down and where we have to pay more attention is in education, because it is through education that we actually understand how to evaluate. And, most people are not working for private equity and doing due diligence, which you still have to be very careful with. But we all are in a world where, with the news, we need to do due diligence. And we have people who are spouting absolute lies. I worry that people are so numbed to the misinformation that they just turn off all information. And also, people are, their dopamine is being fed by social media. getting people angry gets them engaged. It actually creates this rush of affiliation, and it's driven people apart rather than bring them together. In terms of trust itself, when I was growing up, if Walter Cronkite said it, for the most part, you believed it on CBS News. Edward R. Murrow, trusted people. I think that we have seen a lot of television news, including cable news, become highly editorialized and partisan. It doesn't mean it's false. And I think we need first to draw a distinction between that which is absolutely not true and that which is true but maybe slanted. And then where do you go in terms of assessing how you yourself want to process that which is true once you've determined it's true, so that it's contextualized in a way that is not immediately slanted in one direction or another? And I don't know that we yet have tools to do that. We need to do that. In terms of CNN, Fox, MSNBC, the New York Times, even the Wall Street Journal, there is an editorial overlay to the information that's given. I'm okay with that, by the way, personally, because as long as I understand what the editorial overlay is, I can take that into account. What I can't tolerate is things that are just not true. Now, sometimes it's not true because the rush to publish in the internet speed makes causes more mistakes than the way we used to think about a newspaper editor saying, we're not going to publish it until we verified it three different ways and we know it's true. Those days are over, because people, we saw it with the tariffs and misinterpreting something that one of the president's economic advisors said, and then it got picked up on Reuters and other major news outlets, which sent the market in one direction. Then the administration corrected it, and then they then went back and did exactly what was said, which is they paused the tariffs. But at the end of the day, there are new voices that are coming up, and I think this goes back to where we started the conversation. We need to educate our young people and everyone, not just young people, as to how to assess who is giving us the information and what their intent is. And while I think we are falling down in terms of some of our legacy media outlets, there are new online publications that I think have an intent to be trustworthy and accurate. And I think that we need to have a educated population that can discern fact from fiction, or fact from lies, I guess is a better way to say it, and misinformation, and then hopefully process across multiple voices that are intelligent and well intended the kind of information that they need to process to get to their own educated opinion as to what is going on in the world, what decisions they need to make, perhaps who they should vote for, how they handle their community, and how they prepare for an uncertain future.
And what do you think the rise of AI can do to benefit content personalization, production, distribution?
So the minus is that AI will drive you to the things you want to hear. So we've seen that on Facebook and social media, where basically you're fed what they think you want to hear to just keep you engaged, because the engagement, it generates profits. And also by riling you up, people just hang around. It's kind of why they watch inflammatory people. One of the things that's great about Newsbreak is it has two missions in life. One is to be accurate and well distributed by providing a diversity of news sources, but accurately and without political commentary on top of it. And look, in the early days, their accuracy was less good. Today, their accuracy is very good. I rely on it. I wake up to read it. And the other thing is that they are trying to solve the issue, or the horror of the news desert, which is that local news is going away. And what you do need to the issue of personalization and AI is people want local news. They just have nowhere to get it anymore. And Newsbreak is one of the primary sources for local news. But what I would say with AI is the double edged sword is, on the one hand, it can cut through a lot of clutter to get you where you want to go.
Mhm.
On the negative side, it may not it may not be able to discern what is trustworthy information.
Well, we could talk for hours, but I think we're coming to an end. But it was pretty fascinating.
Well,
Thank you.
let's just go one more place before we go, because it's where Security Scorecard is. To your question, what is happening with AI and in general, and entertainment is the canary in the coal mine, but it leads. We are targeting people directly. And what we are doing is we are tailoring our messages, not to manipulate, but to influence everyone individually, because we have so much information and AI drives that. Where I think Security Scorecard needs to sort of be the arbiter is to shine a light on what the issues are, to shine a light on where the holes are in supply chain and anywhere else, and to then be one of the voices in the dialogue that we're having about how we make the world better understandable, more trustworthy, and more secure. And, Security Scorecard, I think, plays an important role in doing that. And what you and I will hopefully do is, be part of the assembling of what I would consider the elders of our next generation of technology, who actually are the ones who speak with authenticity about making our world safer with the technology that makes our world better.
Yeah, the mission for Security Scorecard is to make the world a safer place. And so we realize that cybersecurity is literally the only industry where no KPIs are being used. You drive a car, you know how fast you're driving. You go to a doctor, they measure your blood pressure. In cybersecurity, we had no KPIs whatsoever to measure risk, communicate risk, to figure out how diligent your supply chain is in terms of cyber risk. So we're trying to transform how companies all over the world are measuring and communicating it. So it does go back to the topic of trust.
And I could not be more excited about being on that journey with you. And I thank you for allowing me to participate. And again, I will use my knowledge, tools, and relationships in media to help humanize the understanding of those important initiatives.
Well, are you ready to jump into the rapid fire questions?
Sure.
All right. Well, Sandy, who would you want to play you in a movie or biopic about yourself?
So, firstly, there's never going to be a movie or biopic about myself, but I love the question, and it's a complex answer. The one of the strangest things that's ever happened in my life is I was walking out of Film Independent one day, their awards, when they announced the nominees for the Spirit Awards, and somebody yelled at me, "Bobby." And honest to God, I had no idea what they were talking about. Then I was at SEMA, which is the car show, and somebody said, "De Niro." And I'm going, I don't look anything like Robert De Niro. And I cannot tell you the number of times people have said I look like De Niro. And he's my client. I asked his partner, Jane Rosenthal, who I put with him, I said, "Do I look like De Niro?" And he'd go, "No." And yet I continue to hear the De Niro thing. And people every now and then think I'm Robert De Niro. And I love De Niro, but I would never want to impose that. He's much better looking. In The Intern, I actually did begin to see a resemblance. But as De Niro would point out, he's skinnier and better looking. But if we used metaphysics technology in de-aging, and they just got bought by DNEG, the visual effects company, but they're the experts in de-aging. If we de-age De Niro, maybe that would work.
Okay. What's your favorite book?
It's hard to say. Thinking about that, it's a good question. My father introduced me to the poetry and philosophy of Khalil Gibran's The Prophet. And I continue to give people copies of that book because it has a spirituality and a heart about family, about life, that I think is often forgotten. And we don't elevate poetry and that kind of poetry the way we should. We need more of that. The other, which I'm reading now, is actually this book, No Room for Small Dreams, by my old friend, the late president of Israel, Shimon Peres. And Perez was a man of peace and vision. He also was the father of the nuclear program in Israel. He was the last of the founders of the State of Israel to pass. And the Perez Peace Institute and his son Chemi have come to me to try to tell the story of his life. And I believe, to things that we spoke about earlier, the telling of the story of the life of a man of peace vision who changed the lives of everyone around him for the better, whether Israeli or Palestinian, whether European, whether American. The man actually, his very presence left you with a sense of mission for yourself to do better. So I'm going to spend time studying not just that book, but his life, to see how we can tell a story that inspires others
Mm.
to understand better the world we live in, and to make it a better place.
Who is a leader that you most admire? It could be in any field.
It's hard to say who, is the leader that one would most admire. I am going to go right now, just because it is clearly within recent memory. Cory Booker's 25-hour speech to Congress did many different things as an African American senator from New Jersey. So the last speech that held the record was by Strom Thurmond in the 1950s, when he was arguing against civil rights and taking away the rights and denying rights to African Americans and everyone else, because the Civil Rights Act's not just about African Americans, it's about everyone having rights, everyone. I think that Cory Booker's vision of the way America can be and should be a country of empathy, a country where we value individual achievement, where anyone should have the ability, should have the same rights and protections, but also a land of opportunity. And I will put Cory Booker, and I'm going to actually speak about my friend Mike Milken. Michael Milken has done more good for more people than I could ever imagine. He is not just a pioneer in health. Obviously, he's reworked the financial industry and created opportunity in industries through his work that would never have existed, that have changed the world, especially technology and telecommunications, as well as entertainment. But he is launching this July, possibly on his birthday, July 4th, the Milken Center for Advancing the American Dream in Washington. It is the only building. It faces the White House. It is in the historic pre-Civil War Riggs Bank building. It is an interactive museum, and it is a place to study and appreciate the best in American business and the best in American society. And as he said, it's the only building on Pennsylvania Avenue that you will not need government clearance to walk into. But I look at, the $1 billion that he's put into that himself, and his vision of leaving a legacy so that he will inspire generations, that people will come from all over the country and all over the world for the inspiration that will come from the Milken Center for Advancing the American Dream. And I think to myself, all that he's done and he continues to do has changed the world for the better.
Mhm. So this one might be a hard question for you to answer, or maybe not. What is your favorite film or TV show?
Firstly, it's an impossible question. I get to ask that question all the time. And I've often said that where you are and how you are feeling at a time will have a lot to do with what you remember about films. I remember it was a dark day and I was alone, and it was a Sunday morning, and I went to the Writers Guild Theater to see a film I knew nothing about called Tender Mercies with Robert Duvall. And it left me wildly touched. When I was in college, I still think it's one of the best comedies I've ever seen, Animal House. But if I had to pick a film that I think I use emblematically, it is A Man for All Seasons, for which Paul Scofield won the Academy Award playing Sir Thomas More. And the film itself, the dialogue, Robert Bolt, a genius writer who also wrote Lawrence of Arabia, the film itself speaks to ethics, values in an historical context that is wildly influential to me even to this day. And then I'll give you one last film, because again, we could go on for hours about it. Schindler's List. Steven Spielberg. I had the pleasure of working with Steven. And I remember talking to Steven Spielberg about it while he was on tour and promoting it around the world. I mean, this is a film where, we had largely pushed the discussion of the Holocaust to the side, and yet now this opened up a new generation of understanding, not about the Holocaust alone, but about all of the issues that are wrapped up in one of the most complex and difficult and tragic times in history. And I said to him, I said, he said, I was just in Austria, and everyone, he said, what happened? He said, well, they watched in silence. And he said, at the end, they did something I've never seen before. He said they gave it a standing ovation, and Kurt Waldheim was there. And people did not know how to react to the film. And in a way, it sparked conversation that had long been pushed aside, much as the Shoah Foundation interviewed people and they talked about things they'd never talked about, because if we forget history, history will repeat itself. And to me, these are gifts and visionary things that will last forever.
And the last question I have, Sandy, if you could choose a superpower, what would it be and why?
I don't know if it's a superpower, but if I could make people understand each other and be civil with each other and embrace each other across cultures and political divides and philosophical divides, and last but not least, the most important thing, make them kinder. If that were a superpower, that would be the superpower I would want.
I love it. Well, Sandy, huge thank you. Thank you everyone for joining us. In case you missed it, the entire webinar will be available on the Bright Talk channel. Sandy, I think it was amazing having you here. Huge, huge thank you to you.
Well, I want to thank you, Alex, and I want to thank Security Scorecard for the work that it's done. And just, I have the hope that I can add to that.